Dorothea Puente, often referred to as the Death House Landlady, is one of America's most notorious female serial killers. Her story is both chilling and complex, intertwining themes of abuse, survival, deception, and murder. Below is a detailed account of her life and crimes. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. Her childhood was marked by extreme hardship, instability, and trauma. Her parents, both alcoholics, were abusive and neglectful. Dorothea's father, Trudy Gray, was a cotton picker who struggled with tuberculosis. He often terrorized the family with threats of suicide. Dorothea's mother, Trudy May, was also abusive and neglectful, frequently leaving her children to fend for themselves while she went out drinking. When Dorothea was 8 years old, her father died of tuberculosis. Her mother died in a motorcycle accident just a year later. Orphaned and vulnerable, Dorothea was sent to an orphanage, where she faced further abuse. These early years of instability and trauma would shape her deeply, planting the seeds for the deceptive and manipulative behavior that would later define her life. Dorothea married several times throughout her life, each relationship marked by turbulence. Her first marriage was to a soldier named Fred McFall in 1945, with whom she had 2 daughters. However, the marriage ended in divorce, and Dorothea sent her daughters to live with relatives, abandoning them entirely. She remarried in 1948 to a man named Axel Johansson. This marriage lasted for 14 years, but was marred by frequent separations and Dorothea's escalating criminal activities. She started working as a prostitute and was arrested multiple times for vagrancy and owning a brothel. In 1960, Dorothea was arrested for running a brothel in Sacramento, California, and sentenced to 90 days in jail. Her criminal record grew, and she spent time in and out of jail for various offenses, including forgery and theft. In the 1970s, Dorothea reinvented herself as a respectable older woman, operating a boarding house for the elderly and mentally disabled. She portrayed herself as a kind and caring landlady, often wearing conservative clothing and maintaining an image of a grandmotherly figure. Behind this facade, however, she was engaged in far more sinister activities. She began to forge the signatures of her tenants on their Social Security checks and steal their money. Dorothea would continue to cash these checks even after the tenants had died, which she explained away as running errands for them. The true extent of Dorothea Puente's crimes came to light in the 1980s, when social workers began to notice that several of her tenants had gone missing. Neighbors reported a foul odor coming from her property, and in 1988, a social worker investigating the disappearance of one of Dorothea's tenants alerted the police. When the police arrived at her boarding house, Dorothea allowed them to dig in the garden. They were shocked to discover the remains of several bodies buried on the property. In total, 7 bodies were found buried in her yard, though it is believed she may have killed as many as 9 people. Dorothea's method was chilling. She would poison her tenants with overdoses of medication, often slipping it into their food or drinks. Once they were dead, she would bury them in the garden, continuing to cash their Social Security checks. The victims were often vulnerable individuals, including the elderly, homeless, and mentally ill. As the police continued to unearth bodies from her yard, Dorothea Puente calmly maintained her innocence, even offering the investigators homemade snacks as they worked. However, her composure was a ruse. On November 13, 1988, Dorothea asked the police if she could leave the house to buy a cup of coffee at a nearby hotel. The police, not yet fully aware of the extent of her crimes, allowed her to leave. Dorothea took this opportunity to flee Sacramento and headed to Los Angeles. A week later, a man in a Los Angeles bar recognized her from the news coverage of the case and reported her to the police. Dorothea was promptly arrested and extradited back to Sacramento to face trial. The investigation revealed a total of 7 bodies buried on her property, though it is believed that she may have killed as many as 9 people. Dorothea Puente's trial began in 1992, and it was one of the most sensational trials of the decade. She was charged with 9 counts of murder, The prosecution painted her as a cold, calculating killer who preyed on society's most vulnerable members for financial gain. The defense, however, argued that Dorothea was a misunderstood woman who had tried to help her tenants, but had been overwhelmed by the challenges of caring for them. The trial lasted several months, with dozens of witnesses testifying against Dorothea. The most damning evidence was the bodies found in her yard and the testimony of former tenants who had narrowly escaped her deadly grasp. After deliberating for several days, the jury found Dorothea Puente guilty of 3 counts of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dorothea Puente spent her final years in the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California. She continued to maintain her innocence, giving interviews in which she denied any wrongdoing. Her story fascinated the public, and she became the subject of several books, documentaries, and true crime television shows. On March 27, 2011, Dorothea Puente died in prison at the age of 82. Even in death, she remained an enigmatic figure, with some people still believing that she was a misunderstood woman who had been unjustly accused, while others viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who preyed on the vulnerable. Dorothea Puente's crimes left a lasting impact on the community in Sacramento and on the field of criminal psychology. Her ability to maintain a facade of respectability while committing heinous acts has been studied as an example of how appearances can be deceiving. Her case also highlighted the dangers faced by vulnerable populations, particularly the elderly and mentally ill, who can easily fall victim to predators like Dorothea. Today, Dorothea Puente's former boarding house still stands in Sacramento, serving as a grim reminder of the horrors that occurred there. The house has become a macabre tourist attraction, with people visiting to learn more about the crimes of the Death House Landlady.